It all started with the default cube, and here's what it looks like rendered in the viewport. So the modeling was pretty simple, as I just used the default cube to model the kitchen, and then I made a few cuts for natural lighting. For the furniture, I just used the default cube again from the add menu and modified it to suit the furniture. I copied the same cube and repeated the process until I was done with all the furniture. The key thing to note is that I made the sink out of the same cube as well. This cut was created through the option called bridge bases. These ones, I just slightly modified them at the edge to make it look nice. Yeah, that was the entire kitchen furniture. Everything else was just props. The texturing is where the trick happens, because I literally just use free textures from the Polygon add-on and use them for my model. So I generally like playing around with textures, and hence I modified this marble texture and turned it into a black marble texture. The texture actually looks like this. This is what I got off Polygon and converted it into that. So I basically used a linear light, a darken node, a few color ramps, and that's it. It is a fine balance, because if the sliders are not in the right position, you might get some artifacts, some light distortions. So yes, it did take a while to actually modify this texture. Similarly, for the wooden texture that you see here, I just used a mix color node to make it a little darker than it originally is. That's the original, and that's the final result. To not have the black texture completely bland black, I decided to add a bit of a smudge texture as a roughness map to it. So that just adds a bit of realism edge, if you know what I mean. And I think I've added that even on the tap. The tap is again a free model from Blender Kit library, but then I modified it and added a smudge texture to it, overlaid it, so it just adds that value to your renders. For the texture changing animation, all I did was run two textures through a mix shader and animate the factor value. So when the timeline slider is at 1, I set it to 0, and you animate it by clicking on the button there, and then you shift and right arrow to shift to the last frame, and you animate that again to 1, and then you click on that again, and that was it. Now if you run the animation, you'll see that the texture slowly shifts and changes to the other texture, and that is how I did all the texture changing animation. For the floor, I created a small cut in between and created a small dip to give it that tiling look. And for the exterior, I just chose a normal free outdoor HDRI and set it up. If you go into world, I set it up with a strength of 100. Yes, that's what I needed. Whatever suits your model, set it to that. That's how I got my natural lighting to work. So that was the texturing bit. Now moving on to the camera and the animation. All the cameras have simple location rotation animation and some constraint to empty objects. So to get the empty objects, as usual, you can use Shift A, go into empty, and you can use any of these objects as empty. I've used a simple plane axis as constraint for the cameras. One complicated bit was using the Bezier curve for camera movement. So if you select the camera and go into constraints, you'll find that I used a follow path and use the Bezier curve in the viewport to constrain it so the camera follows a path, and then I've added track 2 in the Y and minus Z axis. This requires a bit of fidgeting before you get the right movement of the camera, else it just doesn't react properly. And make sure you have your scale applied, else it'll not work properly. To get the instant focus change that you see in this animation, I literally just used an empty object again. So going back to Blender, if I play the animation from the beginning, you see that empty object there selected, that just moves quickly, and that's basically my focus object for the camera. So let me just play the animation so that you understand how I achieved that instant focus change. There you go, that's how I did it. Just a few simple tricks to make it look, when a camera zooms in, it looks real as it defocuses and then refocuses again. So I just got that effect through that empty object. For the object changing animation, all I did was use the scale value for animation. So I got hold of the parent of the object and created an animation, a scaled animation. So if you click on K and then click on scale, it'll animate that property. And then I went to the last frame and set that to 0.1 and K and scale and reanimated that. So in overall, that object basically shrinks throughout the timeline, and I had the other plant object, got hold of that plant object's parent and did the opposite, and therefore you get an object changing animation. The artificial lighting was set up to suit my liking and the type of renders and the vibe I want to create. So yeah, that is absolutely up to you, the way you like to set up your lights, the artificial lights as well as the natural light. My render settings were nothing too fancy, just set it to cycles. Look at the number of samples in your scene, that works out for you. I think I went for 800 or 600 samples per frame, and obviously I set it to GPU and used the full global illumination with their default settings really. And obviously I set the compositor to GPU, denoise nodes to GPU, and in the color management I used display P3 and AGX with punchy look with a bit of gamma and balance the temperature of the scene. In terms of compositing, this was my setup. I used a filter, sharpen filter, just a bit of image tuning, then color balance nodes, bit of glare, actually 2 different glares. Then I think I turned these off, then a bit more tuning with the RGB curves and boom. And then I corrected the hue, the saturation, then used color correction node. I think I had the color ramp on, but then I turned it off because it just wasn't feeling right at that time. Then use a bit of split toning, and yeah, that was it. So that's my compositor. The final renders and the animation came out as such. For the fluid simulation, follow the link in the description to learn how to simulate nicely in Blender. It is a little fidgety, but it took me quite a few trials to actually get this correctly, and once you get it, it's wonderful. Also make sure that the flow object is actually big enough for the inflow behavior. If it's too small, it tends not to work properly. Before I end this video, I'd like to address a few key items. So while building your scene, never forget to apply the scale and make sure they're all set to 1, 1, 1 as one of them. Check your face orientation all the time. The red cannot be facing the camera. That is wrong. Make sure your normals are flipped. In order to flip your normals, all you can do is go into the edit menu by clicking on tab and select the portion that's red, and then click on F3 and Alt 10, or you can just type in flip. It should come up as flip normals. Once you click on it, it should change from red to normal. Again, do the same thing for the other one, F3 and enter. The next thing is try and use HDRIs, because you get free reflection from them, and it does not have to be a very high quality HDRI, because as you can see in an interior animation where the HDRI is not visible, you can use a lower quality HDRI just to light up the scene, and for reflections as well. Those indirect reflections help your scene a lot. It adds realism to your renders. The next one would be PBR texturing. Make sure all your textures are PBR textured. It doesn't have to be extreme high quality 8K PBRs, but even if you've got 2K PBR textures, that should be enough. That should add quite a bit of realism to your project. The other one would be adding props. Any free models that you can find that suits the scene, add them. It fills up the scene, makes it look whole. The next one would be adding imperfections like smudges, dirt, and fingerprints. Again, no scene is perfect. In real world, you will have smudges and imperfections in reality, and hence you need to add that to your renders. And finally, I would say do not forget to unwrap your models. That is very important, to unwrap them correctly if you want the right reflection, the right shading for your model. Thank you for sticking around, and if you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.